and I'm here on behalf of M&M Explorers, which is a creation by the Men and Masculinity Summit. As always, we like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. This is a place where we're having conversations all about men and masculinity. And we always like to invite new friends onto our platform. And we have, well, I just met this gentleman a few weeks ago, but it seems that others know a lot of great stuff about him. So what I'm going to do is just give a little background. Alex Reyes is a native New Yorker, life and health coach, and seminar trainer. He spent 21 years as I like that CHG, Certified Health Geek. I haven't heard that one before. I'm going to have to use that once in a while, if and when I get into shape.
One of the proud creations.
There you go. Working in fitness, medical exercise, and health coaching. He's been a personal growth. Do you like this word? You like these nerd and geek words? He's saying he's a personal growth nerd since 2002, participating in many transformational trainings from different enterprises, including Tony Robbins' coach training. In 2018, he decided to create a seminar trainings for men as a greater expression of his mission. His personal mission is to make a massive difference in the health and personal growth as of many people as he can affect, so that he leaves behind a living legacy through a body of work that continues to contribute long after he's gone. He has degrees in philosophy and comparative religion, studying directly under two of Joseph Campbell's students, and learned Jeet Kune Do under two of Bruce Lee's students, which means don't mess with them mentally, emotionally, or physically. That's what that just meant.
Kick your ass either way.
There you go. He began men's trainings and circles in 2007 and has held various organizational positions of leadership and instruction with distinction, while he's still leading his men's community in NYC since 2017. Would like to welcome for the first time and not the last time, Alex Reyes. How are you doing this evening, sir?
I am great, man. Thanks so much for asking. How are you doing?
I am blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem.
I like that.
There you go. That's what we be. And I'm speaking that you are too. Lovely little bio, but let's track a little bit back. Younger Alex in the NYC. Share a little bit about young Alex in NYC.
Young Alex, NYC. Where do I begin? Because trust me, you don't want me to start at the beginning. We'd be here forever. So the real beginning of this journey, you could say, for me, or at least when I began to see it as more of a journey, definitely began around 2004. That's when I'd started really looking beyond me and thinking, okay, how can I better serve people? Up until that point, it was a lot of self-absorption. And one of the pinnacle moments of my life was when I lost my brother at the age of 17. And he was the only hope for a mentor that I had. He came into my life at the age of 16. And so he only lasted about a year. And I had no idea he was dying. So when he passed, it was a massive shock. And for me, he was pretty much the only ray of light in my life at that time, because I grew up in an abusive household in a rough neighborhood. And so he was it. So when he died, I went into a very, very dark place, and was the only time in life where I had suicidal thoughts. And for 9 years, I remained in that dark place where every year, like clockwork, when September 14th rolled around, and this was before September 11th in 2001, again, I live in New York City, so that's a whole other journey. But throughout the 90s, as September 14th was rolling around, that's the day he died. It was like clockwork, always fell into a depression, because I just got seriously reminded of what I don't have, but more to the point of what I lost, which I felt like I had it for a short period of time. There was no one else, no other possibilities. And then it was taken from me, or at least that was my interpretation, obviously. So I very much, in recent years, it's become about mentoring, and especially learning about the particular issues that men deal with. Traditionally, boys have always needed greater instruction than girls, partly because when a boy goes through puberty, it's he gets a surge of testosterone in his bloodstream, and obviously it's more of a forward and aggressive hormone, and that energy must be properly channeled, or it can be incredibly destructive to the society, because there would be nothing worse than an undisciplined male ego to society. And we're talking older communities, like smaller societies, where you feel the impact of even just one individual that's royally off context or incredibly selfish. So it was always important to put these boys through some kind of transformational ritual that would then orient them and channel their energies to serve the society. So they became imbued with purpose at a very young age, and they knew what to do with this energy that they're experiencing, this testosterone driven impulse. And so that became a fascination for me, and particularly for me, because I grew up effectively without a mentor. And the one mentor that I had, I lost them. And then I felt, went into a dark hole after that. And when I look at society today, I think there's been such a degradation of mentoring, because we've become so increasingly, I'm going to speak from the American perspective, obviously. Obviously, the United States is incredibly influential, for better or for worse. We've exported some good things, and we've exported also some bad ideas. And one of the things is, here in the United States, we're effectively the depression and suicide capital now. And we have been for a long time. And it's become such a pervasive issue. You keep hearing the discussions about it. And I hear a lot of people very well-intentioned, but not well-informed. And they're guessing at, and it's shots in the dark of what it is that's really causing this whole issue. Sebastian Junger, he was a war correspondent. You could look him up. He gave a TED talk called Why Veterans Miss War. And the suicide rate is particularly bad among veterans, 22 veterans a day. So if you figure, that's about 1 an hour committing suicide. So they go off, they're plunged into some kind of armed conflict somewhere, assuming that they get deployed for that. And it's usually the case. They come back PTSD, they can't integrate. And as Sebastian Junger has put it, our lonely society no longer provides the framework to really support and serve them. So they experience this chronic alienation. But it's not just veterans. That cuts across, because you're seeing young people committing suicide. And in the age of social media, I call it the age of peacocking. You got a lot of people who are expressing themselves on social media as if life is super great and wonderful. And some of these social media icons are some of the loneliest and most depressed people that you can find. And you even got celebrities that are committing suicide. So we're looking at a broad problem across different segments of society. And what I'm seeing is, I think Sebastian Junger nailed it when he said that it's our lonely society. We have become so self-absorbed that we've lost human connection. And social media, for the most part, it depends, of course, on how you use it. Some people use it in a really great way, but it has fed a greater amount of self-absorption. And when people feel alone, we are not designed to be alone. We are designed to be in communities. We are designed to have connection with each other. And when that is lost, it is very easy to fall to a dark place, depression, and if it continues and it intensifies, of course, suicidal thoughts is just around the corner. So it's something that I've been seeing intensify, and having gone through some incredibly difficult situations myself, and having been in a dark hole and having been in an incredibly lonely place, my mission has been building communities, starting with men, because I find that it's usually tougher for men to form bonds with each other. It's also a different dynamic. Men, we traditionally have formed bonds with each other by often doing something together. So I became a big proponent for my New York City community to push for community service. So what we do is we feed several thousand homeless people a year. And we get together and we invite other men. And the way that my mentor said it years ago was that there's nothing like men coming together in service of something beyond themselves for a greater cause that causes them to bond, right? And it really taps into those ancient communal hunting instincts that we had. There's stuff that we did together traditionally either going to war together or just surviving together, acquiring food together. But we did things that were survival oriented together, and we always brought it back to, in some way serve our larger community. And it's become an amazing venture here in New York where we go in, and we're actually doing it next Wednesday. And it's for the Xavier Mission. They have the largest soup kitchen in New York City where they feed about 1,000 people every Sunday. It's huge. And so what we do is we do our own thing where we go in usually on a Wednesday night. It'll be like 15 of us tribe members. That's the organization. And then we have, we invite friends of ours and we get together. It's a whole bunch of men and we have different teams and sub teams. It's a very organized and concerted effort governed by a 9-page action plan. And we're just doing this to serve a bunch of strangers. And it's in 2 parts where there's a men's shelter that is run by the Xavier Mission a few doors over. So usually their capacity is 12, I think. So we have a team that goes and serves them some food right then and there. Then what we do is we create at least 250 meal bags and we write encouraging and loving messages on them. So that, because those meal bags are going to go to people that we'll never meet most likely. So when they see this thing and they see a message of encouragement there, then, the real purpose there is to not just feed the body, but to feed the soul, to let them know that there are people that give a damn. So we get together, we do that, and then we also have a clothing drive part of it. And I think our record is we've collected over 700 articles of clothing in one night, and they have a huge walk-in closet over there. So that's become a big mission for us, and we bond over that. We immediately have to step out of ourselves, and our energy, our focus, our intent has to be in service of other people. So it's a collective higher purpose project, and it does a couple of things. One, like I said, it has us bond, right? But another thing that it does is it has us really creates perspective for our own lives, because particularly when we meet these men of the shelter, I've gone in there and I've seen men from different walks of life. I've seen young Iraq veterans. I've seen older gentlemen who just never climbed out of the financial collapse of 2008. It just sent their lives spiraling downward. I remember seeing a young man from Kenya who was doing his PhD in physics at City University of New York. And there he was in this homeless shelter with his textbooks out, studying. So you see these different men from different walks of life, and they've all come into this situation for obviously very different reasons. So it causes us to create or have a certain perspective on our own lives. And no matter how tough things are, we don't have it that bad. That, we then have less or nothing to complain about when we're there connecting with people that have much less than we do. So, yeah, younger Alex had been on a mission of trying to discover who he was in this world and what he was really about, and went through a hell of a lot of different phases to come to this point of how do I make a difference in people's lives? And for me, the 2 big areas was health and personal growth, and particularly in serving men. That's been the passion project, because obviously as a man, I know what it is, and I've gone through a lot of these challenges. So,
okay. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing in depth some of your journey. Again, my condolences and our condolences on the loss of your brother. Can you nail down when you made that turn saying, my journey is to serve men? Was there an event or a series of events that said, okay, this is going to be my path?
Yeah. 2 years ago. So we have, I've been in men's circles since 2007, and we have a couple of training programs. One is a 7-week program that we call the Point Program. In some places it goes to 8 weeks. And I decided to revamp the training day for the men who become facilitators of that program, the Point Men. And I said, you know what? We are going to take these men on one hell of a ride. Like, we're going to take them on a deep journey. I want them, because for them to really be powerful facilitators, they got to be walking the talk, right? They're not there to be lecturers or to pontificate or any of this. You had to have gone on the journey yourself. come out on the other end, and that qualifies you to be a mentor. So we really put them through it, and we had them look back at their own journeys going back to their childhood, and particularly their relationships with their dads. Because as facilitators of that particular program, it may trigger things in some of the participants where they may be seen as some reminder of dad, and one or more participants had issues with their dads. So we prepare them that you may be a trigger for something in these men. And for some of them, you may be the first real father figure. So we got to really go in and prepare them for that. And one of the ways we do that is we have them look at their relationships to their own dads. And what's it going to take to get closure there? So
Yep, big question.
That's a very big one. I spent a good deal of time on that one. So that was a one-day deal, and the men got so much value from it, and I got so much value from it, where it just hit me like, holy shit, I really want to be doing much more of this. And I said, all right, look, come the fall, I'm going to do a 2-day event. So that was when I launched, I called it Awaken the Dragon, a weekend men's journey. Did it in New York, 2 days. The men loved it. And I said, okay, it's a stepping stone. I'm going to grow this thing. Next year, it's going to be a 3-day. And so I did that in April, same thing. And now I'm doing it in Toronto for the first time, November, and then bringing it back to New York for the third time. And yeah, that's how it evolved. But it was specifically 2 years ago in a man's home in the Bronx, New York, where I led this training. It was 8 hours straight. And that's when it hit me. This is my thing, because it was just so clear. I was imbued with purpose. I felt alive doing it and being of that kind of service and producing that kind of change in the room, and said, yep, I got to be doing this.
Since you mentioned about asking men about their relationship with your father, if you're comfortable, I know we don't have to really get into it. What was your relationship with your father, and how has it impacted you in your journey?
That is exactly the right question to ask, actually.
Well, once in a while I do good.
Yeah. It's interesting because one of the expressions of my vision, I'd committed to the men of my tribe and other men that I know that I plan on giving a TED Talk. And one of the things is, of course, having to reveal my own personal journey. Like, a bit about my brother. But yeah, my father, he was, in effect, a user and abuser of people. So growing up, he was, to say strict is an understatement. He was abusive. I'd watch him beat the shit out of my mother. So there were a lot of things that I saw there. And so here I am in this household where, growing up, I just knew to fear this man. And on top of that, it was then in a rougher neighborhood. So there wasn't really much relief other than the occasional school teacher. When there are these ads that I've seen, at least in New York, you remember your 5th grade teacher sort of thing. And I very much remember mine, because he was that kind of father figure that took such a stand. And that's why I know the importance of school teachers when they are able to really impact young people, because you don't know the kind of households that your students are coming from. So my father, yeah, user, abuser of people. And when I hit puberty and the testosterone began to fuel, it went from fear to rage. And that stuck with me. And when my brother died, it fueled the rage to such a degree that, and I'm 17 years old. Now, my father, just so give you a quick background, my parents are old enough to be my grandparents. So I've got siblings that are old enough to be my parents. Okay. And I was actually born an uncle. I got 2 nieces, 2 and 3 years older than me. So when my brother came into my life, I'm 16, he's 38. And when he died, I'm 17, he's 39. And a few months after that, I just I'd had enough. And I took a stand against my father where it came close to becoming physical. Like, it was just going to go there. And he then pulled out this long dagger, and I didn't care. I stood my ground. I was ready to fight him because I had this whole thing of my brother dying months before. So I was just I was in a headspace that was just ready to take on the world in a bad way. And then at one point, when he'd realized I wasn't going to stand down and that I could probably still kick his ass, even though he had a long dagger, he pulled out a gun. And fortunately, I was near the door. And as much as I've trained in martial arts, there's no way in hell that I know that I can dodge a bullet. So I went for the door, called the cops, and it became this whole thing. He switched out the gun, so he didn't actually get caught with possession. He got caught with a replica, which is not illegal. He got clever. And but it did create this 12-year situation of us not speaking to each other. And that became the solution to create peace. We just didn't speak to each other. And I got to a point, I remember I was sitting in this seminar room. I remember it was a landmark program way back in 2002. And, you know, they have you look at your parents. And I'm looking at my dad, and I'm thinking, you know, it's been 12 years. I'm not a kid anymore. I need to just let go of the 17-year-old bullshit. So I reached out to him, and I went to his place of work, and he had a barbershop inside of a larger market in the neighborhood. So I went to pay him a visit, and it was funny because I'd envisioned, knowing what I knew of him, as much as he had a vicious temper, there was also something about him where I occasionally saw this bright side and this pride that could emerge and this desire for connection, despite the fact that he burned so many bridges. He was just self-destructive that way. So I envisioned that when I went to see him, that he would probably be, you know, introducing me to people like, oh yeah, this is my son, and like with a level of pride there. And I was right. That was exactly what happened. So, you know, we connected. I invited him out to dinner. He couldn't do it, but we stayed hanging out, and I walked him home. And yeah, that was the beginning of, interestingly, another 12-year journey of layers to to peel away and to unpack, because there was still stuff there. And particularly when he hit the age of 88 and he had a stroke, and it knocked out the right side of his body, and he's right-handed, so now he can't even sign his own name. So we spent some time peeling layers away. Wow. But truth be told, when it came time for me to be a caregiver for him, he had his old crap that was coming up, and it was triggering a lot of my old crap. And, you know, we were going at it again. And so that's when it became clear. When I thought I had closure, it's like, nope, turns out there's a little more to peel away there. Right. And I was fortunate to have certain men in my men's circle at the time, because I had very difficult decisions to make as a caregiver now. For a man that raised me, who I feared and then hated, and then had to learn to forgive. And so it brought up a hell of a lot. Stuff that I thought was handled and was not. And so when it came time to have to make a decision as to whether, because I tried caring for him for a year, which is crazy, and he had to go into a nursing home temporarily for subacute rehab. When he was there, the social workers approached me, and they were like, how in the hell are you taking care of him? Because it really was incredibly physically demanding, and I was just sacrificing a lot of myself. And I said, look, I'm hanging on by a thread here. Any solutions you got, please? And he didn't want to go to a nursing home, and I held that out on him. So there were so many layers throughout the years. But at the end, what it came down to was he was approached about staying there in that nursing home. And there was a pivotal moment that we had when I went to visit him. And it was my first visit when he finally said yes to staying in the nursing home. And he was sitting in a wheelchair next to his bed. And I sat next to him on the bed. And out of nowhere, he just started crying. And I've never, ever seen this man shed a tear or show any kind of emotion like that. He just started bawling. And it was just me and him in the room. So I figured, you know, he just felt like he could trust. And it also hit me that he's trusting me to be able to do this in front of and to do this with. And I asked him, I was like, why are you crying? And he said, I'm just really sad. He didn't have to say anything further. I didn't need to pull any more words out of him. He's a man. I needed to grant him his space. I cannot expect or demand of him to express all of his emotions eloquently and shit. I knew what was going on for him. He's 89 years old at this point, can't sign his own name, and is in a nursing home. He's confronted with his own mortality, and he knows full well he burned a lot of bridges. So, because I know, this is one of the things you always hear about people when they're at the end stage of life, they look back on how they've lived their lives. And there's no doubt that when he looks back on how he's lived his life, and he comes from a large family, the majority of them were not coming around. It was me. And whoever I could get on the phone that was willing. And I had a sister in Florida who flat out told me, and we're talking, she's a woman in her 60s, right? She flat out told me, I don't care whether he lives or dies. Like, he burned bridges like that. So there were people who were just not going to forgive. For me, I began to see it as I just did not want to live with this venom in my veins. It's just not worth it. That no matter what dirt he did, he is my father. And in the face of all that dirt that he did, there are a lot of unintentional lessons that he taught me that if I'm really open to looking, I can pull them out. I mean, he obviously modeled for me how not to be in relationships with people. That's for goddamn sure. And as a result, I very much seek out personal relationships and deeper relationships, in particular with people. I really value that a great deal. My father did not, or maybe he did, but just had a very unhealthy way of expressing it. So that was the pivotal moment, was when he just began crying, and I put my right hand on his shoulder and my left hand on his heart. And I said to him, I was like, look, no matter who comes around, who doesn't come around, what you need to know is I'm going to be here, and I'll be here every week. And I will bring who I can. So I'm here, and I'm going to keep being here. And I think that's all he needed, because the doctors gave him a year. He made it another 3 years. And so he made it to the age of 92. Nice. He just died October 23rd, 2017. Okay. So, and I kept my commitment. I kept going every single week, unless I was traveling for more than a week, which was not often. So vast majority of weeks I was there. I would bring my mother. I'd have other relatives. I would get them on the phone. Sometimes it was, like pulling teeth, but nevertheless, I would get them there. I did whatever I could to surround him with things, because he was born in 1925 in Puerto Rico and from a certain town. And so I just tried to find things from the old town, memorabilia, stuff that I could put in his environment that would just have him feel like he's in some place familiar. So yeah, he made it another 3 years, and I stuck it through with him.
Wow. Well, I know that we're supposed to talk about 8 steps, and we're going to get to that, but I thought it was very important. I think this is a very important conversation topic. There's so many different layers that hopefully maybe you can come back on. We can talk about relationships with fathers, taking care of your father. There's so many different layers that you just shared there. And God willing, we will get to them in other conversations, hopefully with yourself. But again, thanks very much, and my condolences on the loss of your brother at a young age and the loss of your father. You're more than welcome. So let's move on to a man's path, an 8-step journey. What's the background?
I've always had a thing with journeys ever since I got exposed to Joseph Campbell back in the late 90s. For those that don't know, you could look him up, but he became famous when there was this PBS series called The Power of Myth, and Bill Moyers interviewed him back in 86, 87, and it was released in 87. And for at least 15 years, it was PBS's most popular program. And it was this dude, Joseph Campbell, who was a professor up at Sarah Lawrence College, not too far from New York City, just north of the city. And he taught about mythology, you know, the great stories of humankind. And for him, he was on a mission to find the one great story of our human existence. And he codified it into what he called the hero journey. He then mentored George Lucas in the creation of the original Star Wars trilogy. And that hero journey has since been used, and it's a lot more complex because it's the academic version. It's like in 17 steps within 3 stages. And he really breaks down so many of the world's mythologies using that hero journey model. So when I got exposed to that in the late 90s, I was hooked. But something really interesting happened when I'm still in school at the time and I'm studying philosophy, right? And I'm beginning to find myself getting disgruntled with the field because I'm a pragmatist and just I was finding it to be a little too damned abstract and dysfunctional for me. It was like, what the hell? Like it just, I wasn't vibing with it after a while. But I was loving Joseph Campbell's work because here he is exploring humanity in its deepest depths, you know, and he was good friends with Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst. So it was like they were going deep. And I was like, yeah, I like this deep shit. So, you know, that really took me. But then a couple of years later, something happened where I'm close to graduating, still studying philosophy, but I wanted to do a few permit courses in the study of religion at another school. And in City University of New York, they let you do that. It's called the CUNY BA program. So I decided to take 3 permit courses at Hunter College in their religion program, including this famous course called Faith and Disbelief. This course books up every time it's offered. 50 is the maximum. And the professor had an amazing reputation. So I register, I get in. It turns out she's the head of the program. Lo and behold, she studied with Joseph Campbell back in the 60s. She started the program in 1972. Nice. She still runs it. And to this day, I go to see her and my professors twice a year at the end of every semester. They have a gathering and I always go. And there's something there about just reconnecting and just like in a way honoring my mentors, paying homage. Because they gave me a very deep understanding of rituals in particular. She taught a great course on myth and ritual. So, yeah, the journey got explored heavily personally and then academically. And I couldn't help but to take my own life experience. See, it became easy to then take my life experience and start seeing it in terms of the journey. I wasn't getting that out of philosophy, and that's the thing that was missing for me. I was looking for something that would personally speak into me and my experience. And when I began studying comparative religion and Joseph Campbell's hero journey and, you know, the different myths of the world, and my mentor even wrote a book called Primal Myth, an anthology of creation stories from around the world, that stuff just floored me because there's a common thread there across humanity. And there's something there even with what men went through and what women went through. And yeah, for me, it was just a beautiful exploration.
Nice. Excellent. Well, what is...
Yeah, so I'm actually going to show it to you because I actually have this model. Now, what's funny is that when I created this thing, I did it coming out of a... this is really brilliant Australian dude named Matt Church. And if you look up Matt Church, thought leaders.
I know.
So he's very good at getting people to unpack their thought leadership, their IP. And he's big on models. And I'm a very visual person, so that's great. And a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So I went through some very deep exercises, and he has you go through a timeline exercise where you're going into your childhood. You're like really uncovering stuff. And it's very intuitive. And then I created this system. So the first step, and I'm going to show it to you and then speak on it. And I've got 2 versions of it. Let me know how this looks.
I can see some of it, like the stuff in... Okay,
so I call it the map
of
masculine fulfillment and legacy, a man's path. Now, it's a more comprehensive model, and I'm going to show you the black line version because it might be... It's got some colors in there, but is this a little clearer?
Yep. If you
Beautiful.
just put it, yeah,
So if
I
you
can see that
notice,
clearly. Yep, I
the
can see it.
first step,
Yep.
you've got that juncture at the top in green where you've entered the environment, right? And you see the hiker image there. Whenever you go on a journey, you want to do your best to have some kind of guidance or some kind of mentoring. So hence the first step is mentor, right? And any environment that you're a part of, if it's truly worth it, it's got standards, high standards, because high standards really push you to bring out your best,
Right.
cause you to really fight a good fight. And so when you've got an environment that serves you and propels you forward, if it's really pushing you well, then you get to that other juncture there over here of awareness of the road ahead. Now, this is what I take men through my 3-day journey, Awaken the Dragon, where, okay, you enter the environment, that's automatic. But now as we get into stage 2 down here, you get sent off on this journey, right? And from the journey, if you're really engaging in it and you're getting deep into it, you're going to come across some very difficult things. And that's when you're going to have to awaken some courage in order to continue, because there's going to be a threshold moment where things are going to get very difficult. And you may uncover some stuff that you've not looked at in a long time, or in the case of myself with my father, that you thought you had closure with, and it turns out you did not, or stuff that you had no idea was down there lurking about. And I've got a saying that you want to own your shit or your shit will own you. So it takes a certain type of training and transformational environment to really push men through and send them off into this kind of a journey, because to cross that threshold is incredibly important. So day 1, and it's a 3-day thing, day 1, we focus on this second stage here. The first stage is automatic. I'm responsible for that first stage of the environment. And I let the participants know that. I'm responsible for the environment. You're responsible for your participation in this environment. And you have to meet me halfway. So I'm going to be your guide. I'm going to be your mentor. You're going to learn a hell of a lot about me. And I'm going to learn a hell of a lot about you. So with that, if they're really doing the work and they can awaken that courage, they then are able to fight the honorable battle. And that's, again, doing battle always with the enemy within. That's really having to confront what I call the encounter, where you have seen your demons and your demons have seen you, and you can't run back to this area anymore, because ignorance is bliss just doesn't apply anymore. It's too late. You've crossed the threshold. Now you know what you're up against. So, there's a saying that a man in my circles has, his name is Rothenberg, that awareness without action is an albatross around your neck. Once you encounter whatever it is that's been holding you back, the real roadblocks, you have to do something about it now, as difficult as it may be. And that's where the support of the circle and the environment really comes in, so that men get, they don't have to do this alone. It's like, yes, it is your individual journey, but men never went on such journeys alone. They always had support. They always were guided, instructed, and even if they didn't know what was on the other side, they trusted the people around them that they were going to get through it. Now, if a man successfully comes out, and this is day 2 now, okay, the honorable battle, that is stage 3, day 2 of this journey. They come out on the other end, man, there is cause for celebration. And you always want to celebrate your victories. It's a big thing I've been picking up from Tony Robbins. And last week I did this 4-day, I flew to San Diego. I was in Tony Robbins Leadership Academy. And then from there, the next day, I flew into San Jose, and I did a day-long thing with Wim Hof. I don't know if you're familiar with him, the Iceman. But I'm big on training and development. And the reason being is, for me to live the life that I truly want to live, I'm going to need to seek out the right mentors and to be trained and developed myself. But then if I want to be that kind of mentor and guide for others, I got to be walking the talk. So always want to celebrate your victories, man. No matter how tough the road is, no matter how tough shit is, if you really come out on the other end and you feel like you got a handle on it, like you've got some hold over it and it no longer has a hold over you, there's cause for celebration. Now that crosses over into the final stage here, and it's day 3, and it's self-discovery. And that's truth and purpose. And what I mean by truth is a personal truth, that when you go through this honorable battle, when you go through this difficult journey and you come out on the other end, it will reveal some personal truth about you. It may shed some light on what you're really about and why you came into this world to begin with. And it may reveal a higher purpose for you. Because for some of us, the pain we go through in the honorable battle, that pain can become our purpose. You know, our mess can become our message.
Yep.
When you come out on the other end. And that's what I really push men toward, because it is our historic role to be mentors. That to be mentors, we have to qualify. And by qualifying, that means you have gone through this thing, man. And then you come back and you return to give the gift of growth to another man that you can now help to send off. And so those are the 8 steps within 4 stages and across 5 junctures. So it's a very comprehensive model. And I did my best to make it as simple as possible. And when I lay out the trainings, you know, I really get deep into this. And I have it up on a poster that's 4 feet high. And I keep it up with 2 other models for all 3 days so that men can continually map where they are, so that they can see where they are and they can see what the next step is. And if they're stuck somewhere, they can point to it. Here's where I'm stuck. And then we can perhaps do some coaching and see how to best serve the man to get him to move up. And then quickly, I'll just show you this thing, and maybe this is for another call, but another model that I created is what I call the purpose ladder. So if you notice, a man's path ends with purpose. This whole thing is about purpose. And if you notice there in the center, it's crossing a tipping point. That tipping point is what every man is supposed to cross in order to experience a level of fulfillment that is historic, psychological, biological, anthropological. Because again, we have always lived in communities. And our historic role as men is to be mentors for the next generation, to make sure that they are properly trained up. So this whole thing is another comprehensive thing that I teach, but it's ultimately, this is the game that we are playing. And the purpose of the man's path to get around, you could go around that thing 40, 50, 60 times in life. But in the end, the purpose is to elevate yourself. Every man should at the very least be at the level of community. At the very least, that is a bare minimum that I push every man to. Organization and world, that's a whole other thing. Not everyone wants that. But when a man goes through the path and he really discovers that truth and that purpose about himself, he may realize that he was put on this earth for a much bigger game than he ever thought. And it might scare the shit out of him. So that's it.
Thank you so much for laying that out. Before we go any further, I just want to shout out people that are in the Get Vocal room. Want to shout out to Lee Rosen, program lead for the Men of Masculinity organization. We have Michelle Berenza. We have Big Bad Brad. We also have Mr. Roden. We had Steve Richmond in, but he's jumped out for a little bit. If anyone is in the Get Vocal platform and you want to jump in, add your comments. If you have any questions, please feel free to do that. Alex, and thank you for laying out what you share with these men. When you talk about you've talked about a journey. Are there common things you hear from the men that you mentor that they feel they're missing in their journey?
Yeah. So first, no matter what, because whenever I'm in a room with men, obviously different backgrounds, and they've all got different stories. But in the end, what's interesting is that there's a small subset of emotions, of experiences ultimately. The specific stories are what they are, but what it causes in men, there's only a few. A big one is feeling alone.
Okay.
And it causes men, our, adaptation will be to then do it alone.
Right.
And when men enter an environment like this, one of the big challenges is actually getting them to not do it alone, to actually start to open up and trust other men. That's a big one. Like, that's huge, because while they know that it's missing, to know what's missing is one thing. To go and engage it with it and experience it is a whole other thing. And it might scare you because you didn't realize what you were in for. And for men to trust each other, it takes something. It's again, bonds amongst men were always formed by us doing things with each other. Competition of some sort, something
Yep.
physical usually, where we get to use that testosterone and then we form bonds around this communal collective action, whatever it is. But that's among the biggest ones that I see is feeling alone, not wanting to be alone, but and then being confronted with having to break through to the other side to actually form a masculine trusting bond with another man. So
I
that's a big one.
okay. Now, do you have a wide age range of gentlemen that come to your programs?
Yeah, been attracting a lot of younger men lately, which I'm very proud of, because that for me is the greatest opportunity, to mentor the next generation. They're inheriting the world, and while a lot of people like complaining about younger generations, in the end, we are all collectively responsible for creating the environment that raised them. So you can only complain so far before it all starts coming back to you.
Right.
And so it's been 20s to 40s is the most common, with some men in their 50s.
Yep.
But 20s to 40s is definitely quite common.
Okay. And are you hearing the same thing about doing things alone from the 20-year-olds that you're hearing from the 40-year-olds?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's just it's a byproduct of the times that we live in. It's you can have veterans who might be in their 30s committing suicide, and then young men in their 20s who just feel completely alone, isolated, and contemplating the same thing or doing the same thing. When you look at the age range of suicide, it's generally on the younger side. But yeah, you still hear the same issues. It's just that the different generations deal with them differently because they were raised differently. So they have a different background and context from which to come at the same problem.
Interesting. You've mentioned about suicide a few times, and one of the things I was exposed to many years ago is that when the suicides that are committed by people over 40 years old, 80% of them are men.
Mm.
And in the teenage years, suicide again, 80% boys.
Mm-hmm. We got the toughest time with processing emotions. Bringing it back, like bringing it to the women for a bit as a comparison. Traditionally speaking, in a lot of societies, when a woman went through puberty, obviously her experience is very different. It's almost like she has an event happening to her. It's more traumatic because she's now bleeding through her genitalia, right? We men, it's like we just experience more energetic and aggressive push, and it's we just start pushing and wanting to act more in our environments. Women tend to be more intuitive, and a lot of the times in a lot of traditional societies, when a young girl starts to menstruate, the women would gather and just be with her to help her process what's happening. So as a result, women tend to have an easier time of processing even difficult emotions. A lot of the times women could come together and just talk it out and it'll be enough. For a lot of men, that's just not going to be enough. There's something that must be done. There's something that has to shift. And I have very specific exercises and some physical exercises to get men to that point across the threshold.
Right.
Because it's, I have to access those natural drives within them and to give them the appropriate expression that would generally be found socially unacceptable in a lot of environments. And men need a safe, sacred place. It's harder for men to be vulnerable, to reveal, right, as we say. And there has to be an environment tailored and tuned in such a way where it can get men to go there. And a lot of the times it's something physical, something challenging, something that just has them access and express. I give it the context of raw primal expression. That if you can get them to a raw place emotionally and then give it a physical expression of some sort, you will then find that afterward it's an unloading process, and they're now able to better verbalize what they were feeling before that they couldn't put into words. Like with my father,
Right.
he didn't have to say anything other than, I'm just really sad, through those tears. That's all that was needed. Man to man, I needed to give him his space. I got it. I didn't need to engage in a fishing expedition and pull out any more words in him. I got to respect and honor where he's at. And I knew what was going on for him. He didn't have to tell me. So yeah, it's a matter of getting men to that very honest, raw place. And it requires different strategies oftentimes than what will work for women.
Excellent. I want to go back, like, about, it's an 8-step journey. I want to know what percentage of men that you've mentored, coach, helped either have given up on their journey or don't have a journey.
Mm. Yeah, you just touched on something there, man. So I've only got 3 models. I wasn't going to show this one, but I'm going to show it to you very quickly because it answers your question.
Thank you.
This is what I call the Be Free model. And so are you familiar with Simon Sinek?
Absolutely.
So the golden circle, right?
Yep.
Okay. So here's the why. Here's the how. No, I'm sorry. Here's the what. And then what ties them together is the how. So when I take men on this journey, there must be willingness. They have to bring a willing and open heart.
Yep.
If that is not, I can only serve the willing. As much as I pride myself on being a stellar coach and a trainer, and I've produced great breakthroughs for men, man ain't willing, just we can't move forward. We're not meeting halfway. And, that is what has caused so many men to quit or to not even engage, because if there's no willingness, that's the first step. We got nothing. There's no journey. There's nothing. They're not playing this game. And there are some men, like I'd mentioned before, that when a man he starts to go deep and he crosses that threshold and he's having to confront some very difficult things, he's got a choice. Either he awakens that courage to fight that honorable battle, which requires a tremendous amount of willingness and persistence. Either he really brings that forward, or he exits, he quits, and that's it, game over. Mm-hmm. Now, sadly, what will likely happen is, because, again, you can't really run from it. It's there. You've encountered it. You've discovered it. And ignorance is bliss. It doesn't apply anymore. You now know. It will likely come back to haunt the man in some way. And the door is always open for him to re-engage. There's always that possibility. I wonder if we all have our breaking point. And when somebody reaches that breaking point, that doesn't mean that they have to stay stuck down there. They can, at some point, re-engage. And it might just be that this is not the time. It might just be that, years ago in my early 20s, I can tell you I would not have been resonating with this stuff. I was way too deep into the dark hole. It was just not going to speak to me. I wasn't there yet. I needed to still experience some stuff and learn some stuff. And, now if I had good guidance and mentoring, and as Joseph Campbell even said, that with the proper introduction, he thinks almost anybody can get into the field of mythology because he pioneered it. And I think he's right, that with the right introduction, most men could open up. And that's what it boils down to. The man's got to open up and that creates the willingness. If he's got the willingness and he can persist with the willingness, he can go through. But specifically to your question, percentage wise of men that have opted out, not huge, but I'd say 10% or a little more,
Okay.
somewhere around there.
More than
And
two.
I created this training to also have it be, really coming from what Joseph Campbell said, that with the right introduction, I created it so that men can have an introduction to this stuff, and they are set up and they are told, yes, this will be a challenging journey, and you got to be ready for it. It's not for the faint at heart.
It's interesting. I do a lot of work with men, especially fathers, and one of the things I'm concerned about these days is, and I think it aligns with the journey stuff that I asked you about. It's so easy for many men these days to quit.
And that's sadly becoming the popular
Yep.
theme, man. They're quitting fathering, right? They're just opting out, and it's the path to maturity has now gotten longer, and there's a longer period now of young men remaining immature and just not growing up and not wanting to be decisive, not wanting to be responsible, because to be decisive means you got to be responsible for whatever it is you decided on. So they don't want to make important life decisions anymore. That's it. They want to keep partying longer, and it's a lack. It's that self-absorption thing that I spoke about very early on. We're living in times in which people have grown so self-absorbed, and they're either making it up or they're getting really bad information from pop culture and social media and so on. And that whole thing is very consumer driven, and we've become a society of consumers instead of a society of concerned citizens that really wish to serve some greater good. Instead, you just got a lot of ideological self-righteousness and people digging their heels in, and now we're more deeply divided than ever before. And around what? It's not like there's a war happening like the Vietnam War, and it's not like the civil rights movement, like the major physical realities that were happening. We're just divided now. And it's like, simply because we've grown self-absorbed, we don't connect with each other anymore. It's not about cooperation. It's become about control. And too many people are now seeking to take their worldview and trying to have it be the dominating force because they feel that it's what's going to correct society or correct the world. And, in my saying this, I remember Jordan Peterson making this point some time back, where it's not an opposing political or social view that tends to help. It's spoken truth. And that's my journey with men, is getting them to some deeper truth of who they really are, defining their true values as men, and defining their own personal code, a moral compass, irrespective of whatever their social, political, or religious beliefs are, but really get into a personal truth there that defines your humanity, and it has you express it in a way where you're not trying to burn bridges and you're not trying to burn the world. You're instead seeing that, no, the solution is going to have to be building bridges. The solution is going to have to be connection again, not control.
Nice. I like that, connection, not control. Just reading some comments from the Men of Masculinity Summit Facebook page. Ide Ebuka Edward Obika. I hope I got your name right. If I didn't, it's a mistake of my, not from the heart, just my mind. He says, I'm into boy child advocacy. Glad about what I'm hearing. Press on. He asked what your name is, and Lee Rosen, who's handling the comments on the Facebook page, has given it. Also, Nikki Ballou out of Toronto says, this man is the real deal.
I got to thank Nikki, because he's the one that's helped to pioneer me coming to Toronto and actually doing this training for the first time in Toronto. And I'm very glad to be doing it.
Yeah, excellent. Another comment that working with fathers, and I have a very good relationship with a family lawyer. And he said, when I first met him, he said something that really stuck with me. And maybe it's with men in general these days. He said, all fathers want is to be treated with fairness and respect. Do you encounter men that feel that they're not being treated fairly and they're not being treated with respect?
By whom? By their sons? Or
Just in general.
yeah, society. So there is a shift that has been happening, and so fatherhood is just one slice of it, where
Yeah.
and just what this is called, men and masculinity, right? So
Yeah.
there is like for instance, I plan on giving a TED talk, and I've watched a few other TED talks on where men are talking about men's issues, and underwhelming and less than impressed. It's these days the topic of masculinity is not very popular unless the word toxic is added to it, sadly. And that in and of itself is toxic. That's what
Yep.
fuels the divide. And,
Agree.
it's one thing to be divided politically, and we've seen it historically, leads to civil and social unrest, civil war, even. Religiously, we've had, battles over religious sacred sites and holy wars and so on. But, when you have an ethnic and racial divides, when it's across the genders and even the bigger growing generational divide, what's left? So, when I hear of fathers not being respected, well, yeah, but that falls under the umbrella of, in general, masculinity and the masculine presence is not being valued and honored anymore. And, one thing that floored me, there was this great, so it was a BBC article that I came across, right? And the article says how in the Congo, they're dealing with toxic masculinity, something like that. And the article had an embedded video. Now, what was interesting is that the video was produced, it seems, locally. And you had this local because it turns out that in the Congo, there was a high rate of rape in marriage. Men were raping their wives, like really forcing them. And so there was this one man of the community who stepped up and started creating empowering programs for men, bringing men together, having them in some way, however he's doing it, shifting the context to where they're no longer abusing their wives and seeing them like their property, right? So that I thought was just amazing grassroots empowerment. And the video just really expressed that beautifully. But here's the interesting thing. That BBC article, you'd think that it was talking about something else because they kept referencing toxic masculinity multiple times throughout the article. Not once in that video was that mentioned. And the man who's pioneering this whole thing in the Congo, for him, he spoke his context and his purpose. He said, this is about our community. And we have to come together as a community to care for our community. And if men are behaving this way, we have to be able to handle this ourselves and to really solve this issue. He wasn't making, or nobody else in the video was making an entire gender wrong by implication or even explicitly. And that's the difference, is that we here in the West are beginning to adopt this very divisive rhetoric. And it's what I'm really hoping is that we don't infect places like the Congo and other places with our deeply divided context, because the only way we're going to get over this, man, and get out of this is if we build bridges and start communicating with each other again. Because this divisive shit ain't working. You ain't right and the other person wrong, because then they think they're right and you're wrong. Nobody wins. There are no winners in that kind of a battle. They just aren't. So we got to learn to start communicating with each other again. And the whole issue of fathering, yeah, that just falls under a larger umbrella of masculinity and men in general being attacked, for lack of a better term.
You emphasize in the last few moments about communication, and you've communicated throughout this conversation about the lack of communication many men have. Can you provide some suggestions on how men can break out of that mold? Because when you were younger, you were in that mold. You were communicating. What suggestions can you provide men other than coming to your sessions to get out of that communication bubble?
It is often, I don't see any way out alone. they're going to have to find some kind of trusting masculine environment to break out of that. Because think about it, it's communication. So, I mean, communication involves other people. So it means you got to communicate with other people. You got to be with other people. So, but it's the broader community breakdown and the environment breakdown that has then caused the communication breakdown. Because if environments and communities are breaking down and trusting relationships aren't being formed as much, communication is naturally going to be a byproduct of that. It's going to break down also. So they would have to find trusting environments where men gather and create that kind of a confidential space to be able to unload and say and reveal whatever it is that they're struggling with.
Again, it's that vulnerability piece.
Yeah, it's when you're living in a time in which trust is harder to come by, of course the depression rates are going to go up. Of course the suicide rates are going to go up because it's contrary to the human condition. We're just not oriented. I mean, we've become the dominant species on the planet for a number of reasons, but one of them was our ability to cooperate with each other and to do things together, where we can even fight off larger predators than ourselves or take down larger prey than ourselves because we cooperated and our survival was dependent upon each other. And if you're growing up, so you got millions of years of evolution creating that, and then all of a sudden you hit the 21st century, and now you're in a time of social media and a lot of peacocking and people trying to act like they're living their best life and all this and that, and they're probably not. And it causes you to compare, right? Because that's the thing, we're going to compare.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great saying that Tony Robbins has, trade your expectations for appreciations. But the two big things that causes us to suffer is expectations, because then when they get unfulfilled, we get upset. And then comparing ourselves to others. And when you're alone and you feel isolated, speaking from experience and from dealing with other men that have revealed the same thing, the comparison game is big. And it is so prevalent today because of social media. You got so much peacocking and everyone's just comparing themselves to that. What I always recommend, and actually I'm bringing it back to your question too, well, what I recommend is find who are your models, right? Who are people that you can follow who are sharing some kind of positive message that you resonate with, and then discipline your social media activity to just follow those people. Like for me, I've got, Joseph Campbell may have been dead for decades, but there's still social media channels sharing his stuff. So I follow Joseph Campbell. I follow Elon Musk. I follow David Goggins, right? There are people that I follow, Tony Robbins. Find those people that share some kind of positive message and discipline your social media, because it's the massive age of distraction. You can be distracted and pulled into, and then what are you fulfilling on and what are you living if you're just going to be vicariously living through these, models who are pretending to be living great lives? No, follow people who have a message, who are communicating something, who've got something of substance that they're bringing to the world, because they're trying to speak to you anyway. Right? So start listening to them and really discipline and focus your social media activity to just be on their feed, right? Because you got to really stand guard at the gate of your mind, because there's so many people that are vying for space in your mind. They want real estate in there. Don't allow the typical, peacock to just occupy much real estate in your mind. Get people who are trying to deliver a message, who are trying to educate, who are trying to empower and encourage. Follow them and let that fill your mind and let that feed your soul and let that move you forward.
As we start winding down here, I think one of the things I find interesting about social media there, 80% of the people out there only sharing 20% of their life.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
there you go. Well, as we start winding down the conversation, just like to say thanks for you for taking the time to share with us this evening. Before we let you go, do you have any closing thoughts, parting thoughts, and also where people can reach you, and also your dates for your Toronto appearance in November?
Yeah. To reach me, learn more about me, you can go to manpath.net. So that's manpath.net. There's a great testimonials video on there, actually, of 8 men sharing their journey going through the Awaken the Dragon training. For Toronto, it's November 8th to the 10th. And then I'm bringing it back to New York, November 22nd to the 24th. It's a 3-day intensive, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Wonderful. And any final words you'd like to share with our audience, especially men and those who love men?
For those that love us, yeah, and put up with us. So, yeah, for men, it's a challenging time right now. Let's just acknowledge that and be straight about it. Um, whatever you do, don't give up. But I'm going to challenge you with something here, and that's do not fall into the context of fighting against or standing against. And what I mean by that is there's an important difference between taking a stand for something versus taking a stand against. Fight for something, stand for something. Don't get caught up in all the social drama that's happening these days, because it'll put you in a reactive mode and cause you to default to fight against. Don't fight against. Use power instead of force. Empower yourself. Learn, read, do trainings. I mean, whatever the hell it is, but just, again, feed your mind with good stuff so that you stay on the right context of taking a stand for something and not default into taking a stand against, because that is way too easy in today's society.
Wonderful. Good ending there. Well, before we close it down, I'd like to say thanks for the people who are on this epic conversation live on the Get Vocal end. Steve Richmond, Michelle. I'd like to give big hail up to Steve Richmond and Michelle, who made it possible to have Alex on our platform this evening. So big shout outs to both of you. I'd like to say shout out to Anthony, Mr. Roden, and of course our lead at Men of Masculinity, Mr. Lee Rosen. Thank you so much for monitoring the Facebook channel while this epic conversation was happening. I'd like to just shout out to the people who are on the Facebook side: Ed Abuka, Edward Obika. Also, Michelle was over there too, and also Nikki Ballou. And I'm sure there were others that were watching. And if I forgot you, it's because of my head, not my heart. Next upcoming conversation on M&M Explorers, October 25th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. There's a gentleman named Dr. Warren Farrell. Some of you may have heard of him before. We've had him on before. He's going to be coming back on, and he always has a lot of wonderful things to share and a great thought process. So definitely keep in touch with Men of Masculinity. Best way to find out about the organization, go to their website, menandmasculinity.com, and you'll get everything you need from that site. I am Dr. Vibe, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, but I'm masculinity, Men of Masculinity tonight. And I always like to say, you're blessed and highly favored, a magnet for miracles, a solution for someone's problem. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions, and then aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. Good night, everybody, and we will see you soon. Be well, keep the faith.
Thank you. Have a good night.